A while ago, I was watching YouTube and got randomly recommended this video by Branta Games about using a persistence of vision effect to create a horror game where you can't see anything if you pause or screenshot it. Essentially how it works is your brain can perceive the difference between frames and leaves a sort of after image that you can see, but if you pause it will just fade into the background and disappear. I'd seen this effect before, but I'd never seen someone try making a game with it, and thought it was a really cool idea and wanted to try it myself. My first idea was to make a game where the background noise position was bound to the camera, and when you move your character outside a certain area, it will push the camera, revealing static objects. But the downside was it wouldn't work well for hiding moving objects, so I scrapped it. My second idea was to do a real-time with pause strategy game, where you pause the game to give units commands, but the enemies essentially disappear when you do. This just felt too complicated and unapproachable to be a fun game, as I felt like having to jump between multiple units would make it too confusing to keep track of where enemies are. My final idea was to do a top-down shooter design where an enemy stalks you, but only moves when you move, making it disappear into the background when you're still. This immediately felt fun and interesting, so I went with this idea. It's pretty simple mechanically. The player has a noise texture under them that has a random offset applied every frame that you're moving, and the monster uses its sprite as a mask to show a static noise texture that uses the world coordinates as its UV. I experimented with having the background noise stay static and the monster noise move, but it didn't look as cool, so I scrapped it. The first thing to do from here was to figure out the art style and make the player character. I knew from the start I wanted to do a minimalistic art style of white outlines on a black background. For example, walls are a black polygon with textured lines around the edges. For the player character, I immediately knew I wanted to do rotoscoped animations. The last time I did this style in a game was 5 years ago with my game Theyest Thou. What I do is I find animations on Mixamo, import them to Blender, set up a top-down camera view, cut the animation down to the frames I want, and render it out. Then I import the rendered frames into Krita and draw the character on a separate layer. When I'm done with all the frames, I export them as a sprite sheet, import to Godot, and I'm done. To save time animating, I decided to make so you have to stand still to aim your guns as well, meaning I only have to animate walking and running forwards, instead of in 4 directions like I did in Theyest Thou. This also works well for a horror game because it limits your control and makes you feel less powerful. Now for the player's weapons. So far I've made 2 guns, a rifle based on the Fusil Automatic 1917, and a shotgun based on the 1895 trench gun. I started by making the weapon effects like muzzle flashes and sparks and smoke where your bullets hit things. I made this Halo sniper rifle inspired bullet line effect that slowly drifts apart after you shoot. It's just a line with points dividing it by distance, and every other point slowly moves in a random side direction. I also wanted some screen shake when you shoot and came up with this idea to show it through chromatic aberration instead by increasing the effect with random offset for a short time when you shoot. I added smoke around the muzzle when you shoot, and thought, hey, that looks pretty cool, let me add some more. So I added more, and then even more, and then I thought, this reminds me of Civil War reenactments where they fire old black powder weapons, and the air gets so filled with smoke that you can't see anything. And I thought, hang on, that's pretty cool, what if your guns did make so much smoke that it actually blocks your vision? At first I tried just casting a shadow from the smoke, but it didn't look right, so I instead made this thick line extending away from your player, obscuring everything underneath it. I thought this looked pretty good, and it also feels intense when you shoot at something because you don't know if it's dead or not, if it's charging at you or running away. At some point in the future, I may add enemy NPCs who use guns, and their guns would also create smoke that they wouldn't be able to see through, potentially making for some interesting firefights. Once you've shot your guns, you need to reload them, and I wanted a tactile reload system, not just pressing R. For the shotgun, I wanted you to have to physically pump it after each shot, so I made this system where you drag your mouse back towards the player and then forward to rechamber a bullet. Or if you're on a controller, you flick the joystick back and forth once. I experimented with having a graphic of the shotgun appear on the screen when you do this, but it just looked awkward, so I scrapped it. I then applied the same concept to reloading ammo for each gun. A pop-up of the gun will appear, and you have to move your mouse or joystick in a sequence of directions to reload. It's not the same as in endoparasitic where you manually drag bullets in. Here you just have to move the mouse or joystick in the correct direction. However, it didn't feel very good since you could just randomly shake your mouse and the gun would end up reloaded. So I instead took inspiration from my game Neural Rot, where you have to input a sequence of arrow key directions to reload a gun, and applied that to this game by using your movement keys or controller D-pad to go through the reload sequence. This felt pretty good, so it stays in. For player movement, there's walking and running. I originally did a basic hold shift to sprint system, but it was too easy to run away from monsters. I also didn't want to do a stamina system and needed a way to make it so you can't run forever. So I came up with this idea where you tap spacebar and time with your steps to sprint. You can also reference this dot by your character to see when to press it. I like this because you can run as much as you want, but it takes effort and you have to pay attention to your character, distracting you from the environment and making it harder to spot monsters sneaking up on you. Alright, now for the monsters. I repeated the rotoscoping process to make this crawling creature and made a dissolve shader to have it fade into the noise. It will move toward you slowly when you're moving and stay still when you stop. If you shoot it or it attacks you, it will become visible for a second before fading away again. Now for the story. I had an idea to try finding a public domain horror story and adapting it for this game. I did some research and found this old Lovecraft story called The Lurking Fear. It's about some guy who goes into an old mansion deep in the countryside where it's rumored strange creatures are living and then of course bad things happen. I thought it was pretty interesting and that it would fit this game, so I decided to go with it. But of course with some changes to make it more gamey. I'll talk more about the story in a future devlog. For level design, I wanted to do an old school survival horror approach where you explore the mansion and gradually unlock areas as you collect keys and items. I was brainstorming what the mansion's floor plan could look like when I realized I could just be lazy and find a historical mansion and copy its floor plan. I did some research and found the Biltmore estate, which is built in the late 1800s, and I found floor plans for it online pretty easily. I set about recreating the first floor in-game, but quickly realized the rooms were turning out to be way too big. I mean, it is a mansion, of course it would be big and spacious, so I took some liberties to make it more cramped and added little nooks and small rooms that monsters and loot could hide in. So far, I had been making all walls visible always, but I experimented with making them covered by shadows. I liked how this made the environment feel more claustrophobic and intimidating, but I didn't like how it created a weird sort of 3D effect on the walls. I decided to go with an in-between effect by making so the walls were hidden under shadows until viewed once by the player, and then afterwards they will be shown as a faint line when in shadow. To achieve this effect, I had the player shoot 6 raycasts at 60-degree rotations from each other and rotate them 31 degrees each frame. This ensures the major surrounding walls are instantly hit, and within a second every single degree between is also checked. When a raycast hits a wall, the wall will store the segment hit and make it visible under shadows. I also made this garden out front and lots of detail elements like benches, trees, bushes, and so on. Doors, I decided to go with a darkwood style door. You open it, making it a physical object you can push around, and then interact with it again to instantly close it and make it static. Monsters can of course open them as well. Doors can also be locked, and if you don't have the key, it will rattle when you try to open it. The way the rattle effect works is the door is just set to have a random rotation between -1 and 1 degrees every frame for a few frames. I also added support for double doors that will both open at the same time, and made an alternative double door in the form of this iron gate that goes at the front of the garden. I then made windows, which are just a basic faded out square with lines on the side, but you can shoot them to shatter them, which just spawns a bunch of triangles that get flung to random distances in the opposite direction of the shot, but also travel shorter distances the farther they are from the impact point. Once a window is shattered, you can walk through it, and monsters can of course also break windows to chase you. I made this pathway you can walk on. It's just a path node that auto-generates a line with a gradient texture on it, along with a collision polygon that will be used by the player to detect what footstep sounds to play when you walk over it. Now for trees, I made these tree sprites and a shader that makes them gradually wave as if blown by the wind. It's pretty basic, just a sine wave that offsets the UVs over time, but is masked to not affect the trunk of the tree as much. The tree texture will also fade out if it's in the center of the screen so that you can see your player underneath. I also wanted to have a forest around the sides of the map, but I didn't want to have to manually place hundreds of trees, so I made a custom tool where I can draw out a polygon, and it will use a multi-mesh instance 2D node to automatically draw hundreds of trees inside of it. It works in 3 steps. First, place trees on all corners. Since you can't walk through the forest, I wanted to make sure no corners stuck out that you couldn't see, blocking your movement. Second, place trees along the edges at a consistent distance from each other. This is to make sure there are no large gaps that it looks like you could reasonably walk through. Finally, place trees at random points inside the polygon to fill it out. And the final detail is to have a line going around the edge with this roots texture on it. And there you go, a pretty nice looking forest. Now for sound design. I thought it might be interesting to find old public domain movies, like Night of the Living Dead, and sample them for sounds to use in the game. But I quickly realized this would be too time consuming to find the sounds I want, so I went back to Old Faithful and renewed my subscription to Zapsplat. I decided to go with a very realistic sound aesthetic, especially for the guns. I feel like guns in games always have these heavy, highly edited sounds, and I thought it would be interesting and maybe unnerving to have actually realistic sounding guns instead. So far, I think it sounds pretty cool, so I'm going with it. The final thing to do was name the game and set up a Steam page. I brainstormed names for a couple days and couldn't think of anything good. Then I realized the name The Lurking Fear is from a public domain story. Couldn't I just use that? I did a quick search and found there were some movies based on the story but no games. I asked my lawyer about it, he did a copyright check and it looked like I was in the all clear, so we filed a trademark application for the name and I got to work on the Steam page. For the cover art, I initially thought it might be fun to reference the classic Resident Evil zombie by drawing a creature in a similar pose. But then I had a better idea. In the Lurking Fear story, the monsters eat people. So what if I referenced a famous painting where something similar happens, like Saturn devouring his son? It's a very cool and disturbing painting, so here's the final design that I came up with. With abstracted blood, of course, so that Steam will accept it. And that's it for this devlog. Go wishlist The Lurking Fear on Steam, link in the description. If you have suggestions, leave a comment, and if you're a YouTuber or content creator, check out my new affiliate program where you can promote my games and get a 50% commission on sales.